In this video, I'm going to show how we can look at a person's chart without any birth time, just focusing on the Rasis and the planets as representing the different things the person has in their life. So this chart is calculated for noon, and while it comes with the Leo ascendant, we have no way of knowing if that ascendant's right, and we're just ignoring the ascendant, we're ignoring the houses, just focusing on the Rasis and the planets. So one thing we can do, we can just say, okay, let's start with the Sun and Leo. So the Sun is the person's kingdom they might create, where they're going to express themselves. Now, Leo is empty, so we can kind of just consider an average capacity to create an ideal world for themselves to live in, to create their kingdom and take care of their, inspirations. So it's going to be average based on Leo because it's empty. So whenever a sign's empty, you could just kind of ignore it and go right to the Lord. The Lord is the Sun, and it's in the sign of Venus where the Sun doesn't like to be. And the sign it's in is in the sign of Taurus. And so this shows that Venusian things will get in the way of the person creating their kingdom. Well, Venusian things are anything we need to get from this world, anything that we need in order to feel refreshed and rejuvenated that we get from the world, from the outside. So those concerns are going to overweigh their creative inspirations, okay? And to combat that, we've got, if we wanted to go a little further, and again, I think it's best just to start really simple, but if you want to go a little further and look at the Avashtas, you can pull up the Avashtas calculated screen, and there you'll see that the Sun's getting helped by Jupiter in green to 416 points, the Moon to 332 points, and hurt by Venus to 429 points. And the Sun starts out really strong at 514. So the Sun gets some help from Jupiter to make up for that blemish of being in Venus sign, but it's still there. And with this person, they started out, they wanted to be a musician, and they were into music and all the whole music scene, including all the marijuana that came with it in the 70s. And they had a girlfriend. The girlfriend left after she had a baby, and so he was stuck living in the back of his pickup truck with a kid and no way to make a living, and he had like $1,500 to his name. So he had to focus on Taurus, on material needs. And that's because the Sun's in Taurus and it's with Venus. So he really had to focus on this, his material needs. That became the bigger priority because of Venusian activities, basically, because of a relationship that didn't work out really well. And if you know your astrology a little more, you'll know that Venus and Mercury here are shamed by the Sun. So there's a lot of struggle in Taurus, a lot of disappointments and a lot of feelings of, oh, I don't know if I did this right. So at that point they were stuck having to create a kingdom, the Sun, that revolved around their material well-being, Taurus, getting their needs met. And again, Venus are the external needs, things you need to fulfill externally. And the sign of Taurus is one of the signs that suits us with that. Now luckily Venus is in the sign with Taurus. Mercury is there as well. Mercury is in a friend sign in Taurus. So Mercury and Venus are really helping this Taurus sign. So he has the ability to get his needs met somehow. Even though the Sun's hurting that, there's still some capacity there. So he took that $1,500 and he bought a tiny bike shop, like a hole-in-the-wall bike shop in the 70s for $1,500 bucks. There was just a few things. It was, a bare bones, almost empty bike shop. And he bought, the right to rent the space and all the tools and a few odds and ends and a couple bikes in there for $1,500. And decided he was going to supply his needs via a bike shop. Now Venus rules vehicles, so that was a good choice if you think about it, because that was the best planet there. And Mercury rules business, and so he was able to create a kingdom of a bike shop. And thanks to K2 and Sun's conjunction in Taurus, fulfilling his needs, his material needs, was quite an up and down experience. But over the years, because he hung in there thanks to Taurus being a fixed sign, he built this $1,500 hole in the wall into one of the most successful bike shops in the Bay Area, California. Really one of the bike shops with the best reputation, that was pulling a decent amount, quite a large amount of business. So he did end up creating a kingdom, but a kingdom that was not based on their inspirations, a kingdom that was based on their need to fulfill their material needs on Taurus, not the sun so much. Okay? Then we got the moon, Cancer. That's being able to get one's emotional needs met and all their needs met. Cancer is empty. The moon is not with any planets. The moon is in a sign that's a natural neutral to him. So the moon it's just average in that regard. So as far as recognizing his needs, his real needs, and figuring out ways to adapt himself to getting those needs met, he's about average. We can just write it off as that. Okay? If you're more advanced users, you might want to look at the planets that the moon is starving or delighting. That will help the person get more needs met or get more frustrated in having their needs met. Then we go to the next planet, Mars, sign of Aries. So Mars is about the person using their will and strength to deal with problems in their life. His Mars signs have Rahu in it. So this person is learning to develop that strength more, learning to develop that fire of Mars, to use their will in successful ways, to be able to overcome obstacles and so on. Well, eventually this person, after years owning the bike shop, decided he might as well just get on his bike and race the bike shop and, start racing a little bit. And what inspired him to do that, he met one of the great cyclists who did a workshop that he was able to get into his bike shop to do a workshop, a guy called Greg LeMond who had won the Tour de France 3 times. So when he came in, he got all excited, and he had some other real famous cyclists come in and do workshops. So he decided he should race bikes too. So this was the Rahu, the development of this will, the Mars, which can be a competitiveness. It's not exactly competitive, but it's about getting better. It's about training. So the Rahu here eventually caused him to become a person who was in training. That didn't happen until a bit later in life. It didn't happen really early. It wasn't his natural way of being. He was never an athlete in high school. He was just a dope smoking musician in high school. And but then later on, he went on to become a decent bike racer thanks to Rahu pushing him into developing that strength. So I'm not going to consider Rahu a terrible thing just because it's there. Consider Rahu something that's going to take time to develop and have its frustrations, of course, But he kept at it long enough that he became decent. Now, he wasn't great by any means, but he became decent in his category, which was the slightly older person's category. Mars itself is in the sign of Gemini, where we don't like Mars in general, because it can make a person, opinionated, get into quarrels real easy, trying to prove points, not really feeling strong about using their will, so that instead, arguing about things instead of doing things. But his Mars, you can see here, it's hurt by Mercury to 500 points, but then it's also helped by Jupiter to 500 points. So that Jupiter is balancing out that influence of Mars, and it becomes an average Mars. So his ability to use that Mercury sign is okay. But let's look at Mercury signs completely. Jupiter's also in the sign of Mercury. Doesn't like to be there either. So he's got two planets that Mercury's an enemy in the sign of Mercury. That means his ability to plan towards a future that's balanced and that allows him to have a broad fulfillment in life, to live a sensible life that he can be fulfilled on many levels, which is the job of Mercury, and the job of Mercury's signs is not looking good right there. But, like I said, Mars is helped by Jupiter. Jupiter's hurt by Mercury to 503 points too, but it's helped to Mars by 362. It also gets a lot of help from the Moon to 252. So by the time you add up all the points that can help, Jupiter's not that bad either. They're not great, but they're not terrible. So this person has an average Mercury. So in the running of their business, there were definitely times where they ran their business really badly because Jupiter and Mars were, in enemy signs. But then the other planets were always there enough to keep him running the business without losing the business. But as a result, it had a lot of ups and downs. And of course, the Mercury signs are important for business because business is about planning. You got to plan. And selling is a big part of Mercury's job, is managing a business. It's the manager. and managing requires planning and forethought. Recognizing the value and worth of something is the Venus signs, especially Libra. And actually, I should talk about that a little bit more later. But, you know, the act of selling, planning, commerce, those are under the rule of Mercury. So Mercury signs are a little damaged but made up good enough. So the person was able to manage their business okay. The main reason they were able to be successful with their business was this Venus here. And you can see Venus, if we look at Venus's signs, there's some problems in that we've got the Sun there, which isn't happy in the signs of Venus. But we got two planets, Venus and Mercury, who is. So overall, the Venus signs are a bit better. And so in respect to Venus, knowing a deal when he saw it, knowing a valuable thing when he saw it, he was really good at that. And he knew the right bike lines to get. He just made really good, you know, decisions in what he was stocking, what he was buying. And then he had his business was very Venusian in the sense that the customer, he was always concerned about the customer. You know, when you have a good Venus that's helping you with your business, you want the customer to be happy with what they walk out of your store. Don't ever shop from someone who's got a really bad Venus, okay? It is agitated by the Sun because, you know, it's not happy to be with the Sun, which also starves it. But then it's in its own sign. It's with Mercury. So it ends up being a better than average Venus. So this helped the person, you know, make good buying decisions and take care of his customers in a way that everyone loved him. And people would always come and want his help. They didn't want any of the employees helping. They wanted him because he was so Venusian with them. And I worked for this guy for a lot of years. And when he told me how to sell bikes, because I was such a bad salesman, he goes, "You have to ask him to marry you." I'm like, "What?" But those are literally the words he used. He said, when you make the sale, you have to ask him to marry you. And I was like, "What do you mean?" So that was his idea, is that he was proposing to people to buy this great bike, because this is the same way a guy would propose to a woman and say, "Marry me because I'm the one who's going to take care of you." That's literally what he was doing in the bike shop, selling bikes. And of course, I didn't get his chart until years later. I never got his birth time when I was doing astrology years later. And it was really funny to see this Venus considering that statement. So Venus is what supported his, you know, success more than anything. Whereas the Mercury part was up and down. He would get into periods where he would really be on top of managing his business. And other times he would just utterly neglect his business, even a year sometimes. And then he'd have to come back and catch up on things and get the business out of a mess. But as he got older, he, of course, you know, kept on top of it a little more. So the Mercury is okay. His Mercury stuff is okay. Could have been better, though. Okay. So now we can go to the next signs. Mars, Mercury's, what do we have to do? Oh, we did Mars and Mercury signs sort of together because they're connected through the ruler Mars. Jupiter signs are interesting. They've just got Saturn. So when Saturn's in the sign, you're going to have some burden with something. Okay? Doesn't mean it's going to be trash, but it's going to be some burden. It'll be more trash if Saturn's in really bad shape. Now here, Saturn is not in a friend sign or an enemy sign, so he's neutral. He's hurt by the Sun to 333 points, by Mars to 261 points, but he gets a little more help than that from his friends Mercury and Venus. So this is an average Saturn, okay? And it's with Jupiter, and then Jupiter's the other side. It's an average Jupiter like we talked about. Mars is actually better than Jupiter. Jupiter is a bit below average because it's starved by Mercury to 503 points, and Mars only helps with 362 points. So it never makes up for that. You want one planet to make up for all the blemish. So Jupiter is lagging a lot more than Mars is. You know, he had a kid, as I mentioned. The mother of the kid didn't quite work out. And his kid was mostly raised by his mother. And then he saw his kid regularly, like on weekends and stuff. But he didn't take part of raising the kid completely until the kid was like in high school. And then the kid finally came and lived with him in junior high or high school full time. But before that, he wasn't involved as the primary caretaker of his own kid. So we can see some problems with that Jupiter area of life, with Jupiter being a little worse, and then Saturn being here. Saturn, again, doesn't destroy things unless he himself is destroyed, but he always delays things. So it took time for him to get involved fully into the raising of his kid, okay? Because he just felt he was too immature to do it before then. In respect to the Venus signs, we also have to consider that in respect to relationships and stuff. And you already know we had some bad luck there. And Venus, of course, is ashamed and agitated by the Sun. So Ketu and Sun shame the Sun, and that makes a person have something to do with their love life that they're not proud of. So his girlfriend, as soon as she had the baby, she left. So that was disappointing. He got married, but then they divorced. Then several years later, he got married again. So he had his ups and downs. The downs come from the fact that the Sun is with Venus combusting it and also starving it, and then the shame of Ketu and Sun. Mercury helping Venus and Venus in own sign lets him have his marriage. So he had 2 marriages, which is really quite normal almost these days. So it's sort of a little worse than average situation with respect to his love life, considering his culture that he was in. And, again, a shamed Venus is going to cause you some big problems in your love life. So that part of his life had its choppy moments, but like I said, so did his business. There would be times where he would financially do good, and then he'd have a really bad year. He definitely had these ups and downs in both the Gemini, or the Mercury, and the Venus areas of his life. Okay, then the Saturn areas, like health and that kind of stuff. Saturn has to do with health, dealing with your debts. The moon's not going to help or hinder because it's in a neutral sign there. Saturn himself is hurt by the Sun, hurt by moon, but more than made up by Mercury and Venus. Okay, so this person in the Saturn department, he didn't have health problems, but he did struggle financially. He definitely struggled with debts. His mortgage was really difficult. Him and his wife bought a house, and when they divorced, he ended up with the house because he had a kid. She didn't, she moved out. She wanted to move out. And so the kid was not between him and her. So he ended up, having this mortgage that was sort of hard for him to pay. And it was always a struggle. And a big part of his income from his business was going into that mortgage. So stress were, difficult for years. The bike shop was commonly in debt. Regularly in debt, more so than your average bike shop. So he was definitely, could have had a nice Saturn. Would have been nicer to have a nicer Saturn and not had so many Saturn difficulties. And for some reason, more of his Saturn difficulties manifested in debts than health. Now, maybe if we had the house cusp, we could see why that was. This lets us know that the ascendant cusp, which is your health, was better than the cusp of like his 2nd house and 6th house, which have to do with dealing with your finances. So knowing that, we can help maybe guess the correct ascendant. Okay, but between the debts being a little more difficult than average and the health being better than average, he had sort of an average Saturn load. With this technique, you won't be able to tell exactly, oh, it's coming from health more or it's more this department. It's just that planet's ability to produce its things is what we're looking at. But those are the things we can gather accurately from this person's life just with these really simple techniques. So if you don't have a birth time, you can just work with this to find something out, So if a girl brings a chart and she's like, oh, I don't know if he will be able to support me because I want to have kids. Well, look at his signs and the planets. If both of those are good, he should be able to do better than average, regardless of what's going on with the houses. He'll find a way. But if both of those are bad, even if the house is good, it's probably not going to work out for them. This next chart is really interesting. This is a chart of Gary Gygax, who was the creator of the role-playing Dungeons and Dragons, and who through his involvement in that kind of became the father of role-playing games. Most role-playing games were inspired by the role-playing games he developed back in the 70s. And if you look at his Leo, you've got the Sun there with Mars and Moon. Mars and Moon are, the Sun is a friend to them, so they like being in Leo, and the Sun loves being in Leo. So we have a person here who has the capacity to create a kingdom, right? The Sun is Leo's the kingdom, the Sun is the kingdom. There's two good planets supporting that kingdom. And this person created the kingdom, the very foundation of all role-playing games. So you can see this person with the strong Leo that, yeah, you're going to create a kingdom of some sort. Just from seeing nice planets in Leo, we don't know how big the kingdom's going to be. We can't predict that the kingdom's going to be so huge, okay, as the Dungeons and Dragons kingdom became. But we know they're going to develop some kind of kingdom. Now, when we jump to the signs of Mars, we see problems. We see Saturn debilitated and Rahu in Scorpio. So when you get Saturn, or you get a planet that's troubled in a sign, and then you get Rahu or Ketu in that sign or in the sign of the same Lord, things start stacking up. So this is a really messed up Mars thing. So his ability to overcome obstacles, to deal with problems, is not there. And we also learned that Aries, being the head, represents the governing center. And when Saturn's there, I mentioned people can't govern their lives in a way that's successful. The Sun's exalted in Aries, and Sun's good, but Aries itself sucks. Okay? So what happened to him, he lost his whole empire after just 10 years. In like 1984, the company he founded was in bad shape, and he had just gotten a contract to make a movie. He was even going to act in the movie. For years, he was trying to make a Dungeons and Dragons movie, and he was in Hollywood getting that going, and it was really on the verge of happening when he found out that the board of his company that was taking care of the business was trying to sell it because they couldn't run the business. They didn't have enough. They ran the business into the ground. They just did a lot of dumb things that the business was basically on the verge of bankruptcy. And so he went in there and, let go of the Hollywood thing, went back to Leo, his kingdom. Instead of dealing with new stuff and saying, oh, I'll just run with this movie business, he just went back to his kingdom the way a good king would, the way a good Leo would, because Leo is always going to take care of its established kingdom before it creates a new kingdom. Whereas Cancer will do the opposite. Cancer will go into a new kingdom and leave the old kingdom behind. So he goes back there and he basically uses his share to kind of, he had a majority share of the company. He kind of pushed everyone around, got it all lined up, created it, released a new book, wrote a book, and between those two new products, they sold so well, he got the business back on track. But one of the things he did, he hired a new manager, someone who was like a very corporate mentality person. And so she came in, helped clean things up, and then two other people that he blamed for sort of running the business. One of the people he blamed for running to the ground, and someone else who worked there, they didn't really want to be part of the company anymore. So she bought their shares, and all of a sudden she was the majority shareholder. And so at that point, she simply told Gary that, okay, I'm in charge. We're going to run this my way, and you are not allowed to waste time and money developing your crazy creative products. So he was the creative genius behind it all. And so all of a sudden, instead of being this creative company where the employees just spent half their time playing games, literally the employees would play these games and test them and come up with new ideas, that was all gone with. There was no more playing games at work. There was no more testing the products. It just became this kind of cold company of cranking out products that no one even knew if they were good products, because no one at the company even play tested them. They would just create a product, create a book, create a rule, and throw it out there, and people were buying it. And so the company started declining at that point, but it was making a profit for a long time, but the quality declined compared to its early days. And Gary didn't want anything of that. The first thing he tried to do was, went to court to try to fight that overthrow and try to somehow find a legal way to get his company back. But with this bad Mars, he couldn't fight a battle effectively. Couldn't overcome this obstacle effectively. And so he didn't lose his company, but he wasn't in control of it anymore, and he didn't like where it was going. So he just resigned and left the company and started his own projects after that and started creating his old kingdoms. So this is a really interesting chart where Leo's really good and we get a guy who creates his kingdom. But then Mars is really bad. You know, the Mars signs are bad, so he's not able to defend his kingdom. Okay? And everyone wanted a piece of it. This girl just saw a way that she can make a lot of money with this company. This is an opportunity to make money. She didn't care about games. She didn't care about role-playing. She didn't care about fantasy. She just cared about the bottom line. And she didn't care about the creative aspect of it. She just cared about the bottom line. And so, you know, and he couldn't defend his company against her because of this bad Mars. So this is a really good example of, you know, this happening. And even if we look at his chart, he has Venus debilitated in the sign of Mercury, the manager, with Mercury. So he hires a female manager who ends up sort of betraying him thanks to Venus being debilitated, perhaps. Okay? But really mostly because he couldn't defend his company. He set himself up for a downfall when he hired her. And Saturn's your servant. Saturn's the person you hire, right? The servant's debilitated. The servant's not going to help you in the end. So he hired her to help out. Instead, she took his company away. So the debilitated woman and a debilitated servant in his chart, and it was a female employee that took his business away. So it's really interesting. It'd be interesting to see the time of birth and get the lagna right on this. But again, from the signs, you could just see some great things. Okay, how about Venus signs? Well, Venus got K2 in it, so Venus signs aren't great. Venus is debilitated, so Venus is not a great producer, but he's in the sign of Mercury, so there's some productivity capable. He had 2 wives, and Jupiter is great. It's in its own sign. Jupiter is, let's see, Jupiter is great himself. He's hurt by Mercury, by 595, but he's helped by the Sun a lot, helped by Mars a lot. And even though the Sun doesn't help Jupiter as much as Mercury hurts him, Jupiter starts with so many points, 487, when he only needs like 360. You know, he only needs like 360 to start with, if I'm remembering right, that Jupiter ends up being more than capable. And it's in its own sign too. So he had 6 children actually, so his Jupiter life very much flourished. You know, really flourished. Okay. So again, just some snapshot things you can see. This is a neat chart because there's extremes. There's extremely bad Mars sign, extremely good Sun, Leo sign. So right away you know this person can be able to create but not defend. It's just that simple. Okay. Here's another person. When you look at this sign, 2 signs pop out at you. Saturn, Cancer with Rahu. Mars, Mercury, Sun in Scorpio. So you see like 2 things. You see the Saturn doesn't like being in Cancer. Can't get its needs met, right? It's an affliction to getting the needs met. Rahu there amplifies the affliction. It's going to give the results of the planet it's with, which is Saturn. Saturn's in bad shape. It's not looking good. As a result, this person very much struggled with get their emotional needs met. As a result, did a lot of heavy drinking, had periods in their life where they were just drinking themselves into oblivion. Okay? Then we go over to Scorpio over here, where we've got Mars in its own sign, and the Sun, which is happy in Scorpio. Mercury doesn't like being there, though. Mercury is starving that Mars. Mercury's okay in Scorpio, but it hurts Mars. We don't want Mars with Mercury. That's a bad combination. So Scorpio's like 2/3 good, 1/3 bad. And Scorpio, of course, is about overcoming problems, dealing with things. Surprisingly, this person was really good at dealing with things. They even did crawl out of alcoholism, and they were sober the majority of their life. And that they were sober the end of their life. So they did finally crawl out of the basket permanently, but there was definitely a few years where this person, out of, you know, really just disappointment with things in his life, was heavily drinking. Okay? But they had to still, this person was an athlete all their life. They were always doing athletic activities with the Mars here. So they used their will, they used their strength, they trained their strength, they trained their will. And then we also see the Sun Leo, or the sign of the Sun Leo, has the moon in it. So he'll create a kingdom in accordance with the moon, his needs. And the Sun over here in Scorpio is going to, be supported in that, because the Sun is happy in Scorpio, right? So this person can create a kingdom in accordance with his needs. And Mars and Scorpio, when it comes to Mars, is about fighting, especially for what you need emotionally. Because Scorpio, you're going to find out in the next video, is very much a sign of emotional security. So he was able to create a nice kingdom for himself. He retired like in his 40s. He worked a simple job for many years where he managed an office, and he was plugged into everything there. He basically ran the business. He was the king there, even though he was the secretary. So people would ask him, "What do you do?" And he'd say, "Oh, I'm the secretary." But really, he would say, "Oh, I bring the boss coffee." That's literally what he would say. But really, he ran the whole office, and the company paid well. It was, they took care of their employees, and he built up a profit over the years. And then in his 40s, he started investing that. So after 15 years of working there, where he was sort of running the place in a way, not as the king, but as the queen, as the secretary, quote unquote, who was running the business. So the moon in Leo. So he didn't want power, didn't want to create his kingdom. He just wanted to run things enough so his needs were met, which was the moon in Leo. Then he, then he left, and he had all this money, and he started investing it. He was just good at investing money. So then he just invested money in stocks. Then he went through periods where that just wasn't important to him anymore. He just didn't have a need for that. And he was how his retirement came in. He was happy to live on $600 a month. He didn't drive anymore because he lost his license when he was drinking, and he just realized, I don't need to drive. So he could have got it back years later, but he was like, I don't need to drive. The money he had left, he helped young kids get through college. He was always helping a young kid, a person 10, 20 years younger than him, 30 years, 40 years younger than him. Basically, he was always helping someone in their 20s get through college, always. So when he was 70, he was 50 years older than them. When he was 40, he was 20 years older than them. Always some of his money went to helping some kids go through college, even though he himself never did. But that was... And when he needed to do that, he made the money. And when he didn't need to do that, he didn't care, and he let the money slide. And towards the end of his life, he didn't care about having money or a car. And he found out he was happy living on $600 a month, reading books in his spare time. And so he let all of his money, he just let all the stock money just slide and didn't care and spent it and let it go. And that was it. And he died at making $600 a month, living in a veteran's home because he was, had been around during Vietnam. And he was just very happily reading his books and giving emotional support to a student who had a really fragged life who was 50 years younger than him. And that was the kingdom that he needed. And in that kingdom, he always had that, even with all his periods of drinking, of not getting his emotional needs met because of the Saturn Rahu. That kingdom was always being maintained. I remember once he said to me, he goes, "Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I think it'd be better if I didn't know how to make money with the stock market, because then I wouldn't be able to sit around and drink all the time." So he would have the luxury of being able to sit around and drink for a couple weeks at a time because the money, he knew how to buy and sell his stocks. And he just did long-term stocks, nothing risky, but he was just lucky that way. Okay. Now, one reason I think that was there was because the moon is in good shape. The moon is a Vaisya. It's one of the marketer. It's one of the business planets, okay? And so when the moon's in good shape, in a good dignity, a person is going to have more ability anytime they're in buying and selling, okay? Mercury down here is not in such a good shape. So this lets us know that while the moon gives him that capacity, there's something with Mercury. And I think for the stock market, the moon has proven to be more important. Mercury is more important than the actual buying and selling of things. Like if you're going to run a business, But I found when it comes to like winning at stocks, the moon seems to be really important because moon has to do with the cycles, the ups and downs, the fluctuations in the market. Mercury has to do with convincing someone to buy something, with selling something actually, with the practicalities of selling something. But when it comes to the stock market, it's all about being able to judge the rise and falls of products, right? And that's actually more related to the moon than it is to Mercury. So I think that's why this nice moon helped him, you know, survive on the stock market for the last 30 years of his life, you know, with plenty of savings until he just started giving the rest of that away. You know, even though his Mercury is just mediocre, okay? It's with the friend, the sun, but then that sun will cause Mercury to, well, Sun Mercury is always good for any Mercury activities. So, but it's not a fantastic Mercury. Most of it comes from the moon. Jupiter is not happy. The sign of Mercury therefore gets a little less worth. So this person was not a successful planner in their life. And what's really interesting is that this person was a twin. His brother was not a successful planner either. But his brother planned everything and then wished he hadn't. This guy never planned anything and wished he had. So it's really, you'll find these weird things with twins sometimes where they do things in extreme ways, neither of which is ideal. Because some of their planning's thrown off thanks to this Jupiter here in Virgo. Had no kids because, again, Jupiter in Virgo is not promising there. The other kid sign is Venus, or Jupiter signs. Venus there is not helping or hindering those signs. Okay? But the dominant signs we see are the Saturn, Rahu, and Cancer, struggling to fulfill their emotional needs, leading to addictions of alcohol, and the ability to, you know, the athletic training, always training throughout their life. Okay? Last time I heard from him, he was like in his 70s, and he contacted me because he still had his old bike from the 80s, and he needed to get some parts for it, and he couldn't find them anywhere, so he contacted me to see if I would have them, and I had a part, and I just sent it to him and got him back on the road in his 70s, where he was still out there plugging away and being an athlete. He also ran the cross-country skiing, just depending on the time, every day he was out there training. Big part of his life. And always able to overcome any problems in his life, even the difficult problem of the alcoholism, thanks to this decent Mars signs with Mars in its own sign. So you can get some nice things, some nice ideas just from studying the charts or the signs and the planets. And whatever technique you know, I'm using some of my favorite techniques. I love the Logitati Avashtas, but use any techniques you know. Whatever techniques you use to look at a sign to see if there's a good or bad thing there, just start applying it and add the idea that, all right, when I look at Aries and Scorpio, I'm dealing with the Mars areas of life. When I'm looking at Gemini and Virgo, I'm looking at Gemini area, or Mercury areas of life. Okay? And through that, you'll be able to read a lot of things. I think it's always, like I said, it's always good, even if you know the time. Even if you know the time. If you see a person who's got Saturn, Rahu, and Cancer, and you're talking about their emotional well-being, you need to know they struggle with their emotional well-being. I don't care what planet's in the 4th house, how good the 4th Lord is, and how good those other emotional things are. If Cancer's got tough planets in it, a person's going to be struggling emotionally during a big part of their time. So learn to read the signs. It'll really add to your interpretation of the whole chart. And without it, you'll be going, why is this person so miserable? Or why is this person struggle so much in this area, even though this planet looks okay? And it'll be because you didn't look at the sign. Okay, thank you.